Now, since we know who is an accused, the next part of the topic is legal rights. Now, what we understand by legal rights are said to be certain entitlements which are protected or enforced by law. So when we talk about rights which are enforced by law in Indian prospect, we have to look to the part 3 of the Constitution. That is the part dealing with the fundamental rights. So the part 3 from which starts from section 12 onwards, and the rights which start from section 14. The first right, that is right of equality, which says that everyone has the equal protection and equality before law. So from based on that, from part 3, there are certain set of rights which are given to everyone. It can be for accused also, and it for be a normal citizen. Now, one thing we need to understand that one accused is not a convict at that point. He is still a citizen. So he holds all the fundamental rights that are provided to a particular citizen. So basically, the rights of equality, non-discrimination, freedoms, right to life, right against exploitation, right to religion. These are all the rights which are available to the accused also. Now, the issue that is there that since these rights are very essential for human life, that is why they are said to be fundamental rights. And when someone is put behind bar or made to go under the legal procedure, there is a big threat to his personal liberty and the life which he is living. Thereby, there is a huge legal procedure and there is a various Supreme Court judgment that has put some sort of bar and restriction for absolute arrest of a person, and there is a kind of checklist. That is why, because of these rights, Supreme Court and the courts are said to be the guardian of individual rights. Basically, these are said to be these custodian of rights are set for the High Court and Supreme Court only. However, through various statutes such as CRPC and other specific statutes.
Hello, sir, you are unmute. Please unmute yourself. Yes, sir.
Am I okay? So I need to restart from the point. So firstly, I like hello, Krishna. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So I've gone a little bit with, and accidentally I forgot to switch on the mute thing. So I'll restart with it. So firstly, I'd like to thank Milan and Krishna for inviting me for this webinar. And it's a privilege to be the part of this webinar where so many learners are there ready to learn for the criminal jurisprudence. So to begin with, the first thing which I have already discussed, that who is deemed to be an accused when we are discussing a topic like rights of accused person in India pre and post trials. So the first question that comes before ourselves, that who can be said to be an accused, whether he is a random person who has been inquired or he is a person under against whom a charge has been framed by police or a formal complaint or an FIR is lodged. So to clear this doubt, Supreme Court in Abraham versus State of Maharashtra defined who can be said as an accused. The Honorable Supreme Court defined accused as a person against whom a formal accusation regarding a commission of an offence has been leveled, which may or may not result into a prosecution. Now, the key thing which needs to be seen here is that there is a formal accusation and a formal accusation regarding a commission of an offence. So, if a person against whom a formal accusation has been leveled for a commission of an offence, then only he can be deemed to be an accused. It has been seen many times that police randomly on basis of suspicion pick someone, arrest someone, and interrogate someone. So those persons who are arrested on basis of suspicion without any formal allegation cannot be deemed to be accused. So the rights which are available to accused will not be available to them, whereas a bigger set of rights which are part of the fundamental right which I'll be discussing will be available to that person also. So, but since we'll restrict to our topic line, which is rights of accused. So, two ingredients that are there to find whether a person is accused or not. One, there's a formal accusation. Second, for a commission of an offense. If these two matches, then a person is deemed to be an accused. So now we know that who is an accused, but then how an allegation can be made through which fulfills the criteria of a formal accusation against a person. The first way is to give an information to police. Now, generally, many people, even many learners of law, get confused when police officer asks for a complaint before lodging an FIR. So that is not a complaint as per CRPC. That is a mere information that you have been supplying to police so that police can take cognizance of that information and investigate the further offense, which may lead into a prosecution, which may not lead into a final closure report giving acquittal to the accused. Second is when you file a complaint before a magistrate under section 190 CRPC, which is taken by magistrate under section 200. So if these two methods are there through which a formal accusation against a person can be made. Now, since we are clear with who is an accused, the next part of the topic is rights, legal rights. Now, let us understand what we mean by legal rights in India. So, any right which is enforceable legally is a legal right, but how will deal that a particular right is a legal right or not? So, the answer is very simple. Any right, or basically we can define legal rights as a certain set of entitlements that are provided to an individual, which are enforceable by law or which are protected by law. So if a particular entitlement you have is protected under law, so that is your legal right. It can be a constitutional right, it can be a statutory right, it can be any civil legal right. However, if it's protected through some statute, like there are certain rights that is being given through CRPC, there are certain environmental rights that a person has. So those are basic rights, legal rights which are protected. Now, in this course of the discussion, I'll be taking the rights which are available to an accused person in prospect of a criminal proceedings. So, when we talk about Indian prospect, the first thing comes into our mind is Constitution of India. The supreme most legislation that India has is Constitution of India. And Part 3, which is also be deemed to be the basic structure, part of basic structure of the Constitution, deals with fundamental rights. These rights are basic rights that every citizen and may on certain occasion, even foreign persons are being given to. These are said to be the very fundamental rights which are required for human development and person to live. So through these, there are certain rights specifically which deals with the right of an accused, arrest, and the criminal procedure. Well, though all the rights somewhere directly, indirectly affect even the accused persons, but there are certain major rights which I'll be mentioning after this, which are directly influencing the criminal proceedings. So, to begin with, the first right that Constitution gives to every accused, that is right of equality. That is enshrined under Article 14. Now, under this, the article says it is a right which provides equality before law and equal protection before law. So, basically, a state which is defined under Article 12 of the Constitution cannot discriminate while giving a punishment or while making a law regarding a criminal offense to an individual based on different approach, and it has to treat two individual with same on the same, which has to keep the both the person maybe of different caste, creed, sex on same pedestal. That is equality. The second important right comes, which get violated when someone is arrested or put behind bars, is Article 19. That is freedom, freedom of speech and expression, freedom of movement. These are the second rights which are enshrined. However, these rights are not absolute rights, especially Article 19, which is 19 subclause 2 specifically lays down certain conditions under which uh, Article 19, right mentioned in Article 91, can be taken away. So those are public order, public morality, social public order, these kinds of things. When your right is basically creating a hazard for public, your action is provoking public and law and order situation is getting damaged in a particular state, then under those conditions, your right under the 19 has been taken away, can be taken away by the state. And you can be put behind bars, you can be restrained from doing certain things. The second most important, or I'll say the most important article in this situation is Article 21. That is, gives every citizen right to life with human dignity. Now, this is the parental source of all the right that flows across all the statutes, be it right of fair trial, right to air, water, food, or everything comes to Article 21. Now, I am taking this because it is very much applicable in the post-trial situation when person is finally convicted. Then Article 21 plays a very role because it deals with the life the prisoner will undergo. It gives accused a right to fair trial, which is also an ingredient part of it. Even right to know also flows from Article 21 and somewhere to 19 also. Though in India we have a specific statute, but the parental source are said to be these two articles. Now, once this Article 21 also says that your life and personal liberty can be taken away by state if there is a due procedure of law that has been well followed. And if a state following a due procedure takes away your right under 2119, then it is justified. But what is that due procedure of law that needs to be seen? Now, that is a very wide topic in itself. And if someone wants to know and understand what is that due procedure of law, I can recommend that person to read Menaka Gandhi's judgment. That is a landmark judgment through which the due procedure of law has been well established. But just to give a brief idea here, that what is due procedure? Due procedure is said to be a procedure which is not in contravention with Part 3 of the Constitution and is legally valid and not altered or does not violate any other part of the Constitution. So if someone or if a state frames a particular law which takes away or abridges your right under 1921, then in that case, a due procedure which is not violative of Part 3 of the Constitution shall be followed, and it should be pre-approved, passed by the, if it's a state law, passed by state legislature. If it's a union act, then it should be passed by the Parliament of India. Then the second part comes that now the second thing is that we are dealing with the rights of accused in trial pre-stage and post-stage. Now one has to understand what is the stages of trial, because every right is given at a particular stage to every person, whoever is an accused, and accordingly the rights are modified, they have enhanced, the authority level has been enhanced once the stages of trial starts. So the first thing that we need to understand, what is the jurisprudence through 21 and 19 that has developed. The first is that a presumption that every person is innocent until proven guilty. Now, that means the burden on prosecution is to prove one's case beyond reasonable doubt. If the prosecution is unable to prove that case, and if accused is able to raise slightest doubt in the narration of the prosecution, then the story of prosecution does not hold any value, and acquittal is given to the accused person. It's a very old and traditional saying that that courts have evolved. The doctrine itself that if there are two possible or probable situations, one that favors the accused, one goes against the accused, then in that case, the court is duty bound to follow that probability which benefits the accused. So in that case, benefit of doubt always goes with the accused person. However, there are certain acts, there are certain legislature which specifically due to particular reasoning, specifically creates a provision with a contrary presumption. Like for example, when we deal with negotiable instrument act, there the burden is reciprocate, opposite, basically, contrary to the general rule. There the burden of his innocence goes on accused. There are many more legislation, but there are very few of them which specifically lay certain kind of presumption which is opposite to the general presumption of accused being innocent until proven guilty. Now, let us start. Now we are clear with what is the definition of each part. Now let us start with what is
Sir,
trial. I
sorry to disturb you, but your voice is not clearly audible.
Sir, your voice is breaking, sir.
I'll just give the second. I'll just start. I'll use a wired. Just a second. Am I audible now? Am I audible now? Is it better?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Better, sir.
Is it better? Yeah. Or shall I switch to a wired rather than this? If it's clearly audible, then I'll continue with this.
Yes, sir.
Otherwise,
It is clearly audible.
okay. So I was about to start this at the stages of trial. What we call, like, since the topic deals with the right of accused at pre and post trial stage. So the first thing we need to understand what is a pre-stage trial. Now, trial are basically can be categorized into three major heads. One, that is, or basically four. First, pre-trial stage. Second, the trial stage. Third, the judgment stage or the appellate. And fourth, the post-trial, which may lead into conviction or which may lead into acquittal of a person. Now, in the post-trial stage, if a person is acquitted, then he is no more an accused, and if he is convicted, then he becomes a convict rather than still being called an accused person. So, these are the four basic things. I will first start with the pre-trial part, which is the topic of discussion today. The first thing starts with what is pre-trial? It is a stage when it starts with commission of an offense, reducing it in writing, that is FIR, and third, the investigation part, till the time the final report under section 173 of CRPC is filed. So during this stage, police has the power to arrest one. Police has the power to summon the accused, ask for evidence, investigate, can call for witnesses, can make witnesses during the course of investigation, and do all the forensic part, gather evidence at various stages. However, there are certain rights at this stage that is given to accused so that the basic right that is enshrined under Article 21 doesn't get violated. Even then, due to the investigation purpose, police or any investigation agency is also given a power to arrest a person. The power to arrest person is flown from section 41 of CRPC. However, it is exercised only in the grievous situations. Generally, it has been said that there are many judgments of Supreme Court which says that if an offence is left which is punishable for up to 3 years, arrest should not be made of that person unless he is not cooperating in the investigation. Even for the higher side, if the offence is even for something like murder or even rape, those are little more serious offences where court allows the person to be arrested. There are two reasons because of it. Firstly, because there's a chance of accused getting involved with the witnesses and trying to tamper the evidences. One. Second, the nature of investigation can get biased when he is out. So to protect that situation, court at certain times allow the accused to stay inside the jail on request of police or as per the circumstances. But there are certain restrictions imposed to that. The reason these restrictions are imposed because at the end of the day, we at this stage of pre-trial, he is not a convict. He has to be treated as a citizen. So the citizen has a right under 21. He has a right under Article 19, which will get violated. So there is a bar So there's a doctrine that wherever legislation has to be made, it should be reasonable. It should not exceed to the requirement. Balance of convenience is a concept in civil law, which is also applicable in determining this part also. So there should not be a greater harm done. So I'll be going through why, under what, till what circumstances a person can be arrested. But the major reason is that there is a restriction on the arrest is because of Article 19 and 21. As he is not a convict, and we have a law presumption that he is innocent unless proven guilty. So one accused should not be made to undergo the harshness of the prison until he has been proven guilty. So, but arrest can only be valid if the due procedure of law, as mentioned under Article 21, is followed. If it's not, then the arrest is said to be invalid. Then another article comes into picture at this stage, that is Article 22 of the Constitution. It has two parts. Firstly, it's regarding preventive. Second, firstly, it's regarding arrest of an accused. Second, it deals with preventive detention part. So our topic is since restricted to crimes and accused, so we'll be dealing with the first four part of this article only. It's a very elaborative article, and basically it forms the basic structure of CRPC, which we can say that there is a limitation through which accused can go through, and those bars which are derived from various laws such as Constitution, fundamental rights are enshrined in CRPC also. And if police is unable to follow those bar or investigation duration exceeds, then the person has a right to bail, which we'll be going through. But before we start, let us understand that there are two kind of offenses. Okay, I'll deal with this part also here. There are two kinds of offenses. One is bailable offense. Second is non-bailable offense. Now, if a person has committed some offense which is bailable in nature, he has a right at this stage only to get bail. And if it's a non-bailable offense, which generally are more grievous offenses, then he has to approach and take a bail from court. But to begin with, let us understand under what circumstances police can arrest an individual. Because from here onwards, the right which is given to accused at pre-trial level begins. The first right, the condition which are mentioned for the arrest is enshrined in section 41 of CRPC, which are as follows basically. The first condition is when a police officer got a complaint regarding commission of an offense, which is punishable for 3 years under 8, and then the clause B8 it also increases to 7. Under that, police officer is empowered to arrest someone. Second, on ground of some suspicion or on receiving of a complaint, but from a credible source. So whenever police receive any information and they go to arrest someone, the police is duty bound to maintain a daily diary, which is always produced before court when they file their final report. And in that, they mention specifically why a particular person has been arrested. And if they say, we have received particular information and due to which we have arrested someone, then the question comes, what was the nature of that information? Whether it was a sure information, a person can be sure from it or not. If he is not, then the person will be immediately released. There is a mechanism which I'll be telling you in the later part, that how under that circumstances the person can be released. But before that, we let us continue and understand under what circumstances the police can arrest. So firstly, when police officer himself finds that a person is committing any offense which is punishable under Indian penal laws. Second, on receiving of a complaint or having certain suspicion. Thirdly, when police official knows that he has committed a crime and the crime is of continuing nature, and to stop the further commence to stop that crime from getting continued at later part. Police officer can stop that person and arrest that person. Then next comes that now this the second part comes during the part of investigation that police has received an information, they have not arrested the accused person, but has started investigating and finds that that particular accused is trying to destruct the evidence or tamper with the witnesses. Then in that case, police can arrest. Then the next case comes that if a person police get to know is particular person is a proclaimed offender, there is a specific section which defines who is a proclaimed offender. That is Section 82 of CRPC, which specifically deals that if a person repeatedly doing a particular kind of offense and is not appearing for court, court passes a notice and declares that person a proclaimed offender. And if any police officer get to know that he is a particular proclaimed offender, the police officer is duty bound to arrest that person. Then, if a person is found in suspicious circumstances, having certain suspicious thing, maybe it can be a drug, it can be a weapon, it can be some sort of foreign currency which he is not expected to have, a certain kind of illicit content which he is having, then police is empowered to arrest that person. Then the next stage is that if police person is discharging a particular duty which is allowed by the law and someone stops it, then in that case, a police officer is empowered to arrest that person. The last comes that if a police officer receives an information that a particular now there are two categories in it. Firstly, they themselves receive an information that the person has committed any offense outside the territory of India, which is punishable under Indian laws, then he police officer is empowered. And the second part of this is the concept of zero FIR. Like everyone have seen in the recent past, last few months back, that a famous dancer of UP, Vikas Dubey, was arrested in MP. Now, what UP police did that they have informed the MP police that this particular dancer is found in is charged with these offences and we are looking for him. And if he is found in MP, you arrest that person. So our information from a credible police source has been conveyed from one state to the other state, and on basis of that, MP police arrested by recording a zero FIR and thereafter handing the accused to the UP police. So that is another mechanism. The if certain thing happen, the accused from a different state police can also be arrested on the request of another state police. Now, why try to explain these grounds of arrest is a very simple reason that if police officer arrests someone on any other ground except mentioned under section 41 of CRPC or any specific statute of that kind, then again, is the accused or his family members or the representative have a legal right to directly approach High Court under 226 or the Honorable Supreme Court under 32. So and file a writ petition of respective nature, maybe it can be habeas corpus for that person, so that he can be brought before the court and if the concerned police authorities are liable and answerable as to why they have arrested this person without the power they have under section 41. Okay, now we know that when a person can be arrested, what is the power of the police? But now let us understand what is the right that accused person has if police has arrested that person under the due process of law. Like, for example, the information has been given to police for a particular offense that a person has committed that offense and he has been arrested, or he is trying to disrupt an investigation procedure. So, under that circumstances, police have arrested. Now, in this situation, if after the arrest has been done, Article 22 receives the light of the day. Now, What does Article 22, the first part says? The first right that has been given to the accused person. Uh, it says that if a police officer is arresting someone, they are duty bound to disclose the reason for the arrest to the accused immediately at the time of arrest. Corresponding to the source parental right, Section 41B of CRPC also says a similar thing. It elaborately deals with the procedure, what police officer has to do at time when he's arresting first. So the first right is that is the right to be informed for the reason of the arrest at the pre-trial level that accused has. And under 41B, there is an increased obligation on police officer. If accused is arrested, firstly he need to be informed for what allegation he has been arrested and for what ground he is arrested. Then there should be a specific performa memorandum of arrest should be made. It should be signed by the accused, and if he is not able to sign, then from few respectable members of society, and his arrest has to be informed to a person of his choice or a very close relative. If his parents or family members are there, then police can inform them. Otherwise, whomsoever the accused asks the police, then that referenced person has to be informed. The other part comes with Section 50 of CRPC. It's another very important part. It also deals with the same part of the law. It clearly says that a person has to be informed for the reason, for the ground of arrest. And if a police person has arrested that person, he should inform him whether he can be released on bail or not. Now, I have earlier explained that the offences are of two categories. One is bailable offence, second is non-bailable offence. Now, under the bailable offence, if person is arrested, then police is due. Bail is a matter of right for that person. So, if the accused is ready to fulfill the bail bond and have a surety, police has to discharge. It's not a discretion of police. Police is duty bound to discharge that person, and they can continue with the investigation. However, they need to release the person immediately. The second thing, the second right comes that right of a lawyer. 41D specifically says that if someone has been arrested, police officers or the concerned investigating authorities are duty bound to arrange the lawyer of the choice of the accused. There is, if the person of choice of accused is not available, then there is a mechanism of legal aid that is also there. But it's an obligation of the state to arrange a legal representative who can tell what is the law and can guide the accused about the procedure. Even Supreme Court in Hussain Khatun versus State of Maharashtra has said that it's a constitutional duty, it's a constitutional obligation of state to provide legal aid to the person who is unable to receive it. Okay, so this is the second part. Since now when an accused person is there, he should be allowed to meet with an advocate. The reason, the rationale behind is that there are chances when police, due to undue reasons or due to certain situational or due to exploitation of authority which they have arrested someone and they were not allowed to arrest that person as per the law, but they have arrested. So once the lawyer is there, he can guide the accused that okay, this is a particular situation that under which you can be arrested and you cannot be arrested, and suggest the possible legal remedy to it. Third part of Article 22 says that accused cannot be made to stay for more than 24 hours before in the police custody without the order of a magistrate. Now, Section 57 of CRPC also laid down the procedure that every arrested person has to be presented before a competent magistrate or having the local jurisdiction over the arrested area. so that it can be clear and it can be checked, or it can be it's kind of check on balance system that police has not misused its authority and has allowed or has arrested a person under a specific right which they have under 41 only. So this is a check on balance. If a person, when magistrate appears, the accused is brought before magistrate and magistrate examine him and sees that whether the condition has been fulfilled or not, magistrate can question that person. And on his own judicial mind, he can either direct him to continue with the police, he can send it for the judicial custody, he can release him on bail. These are the possibilities which he has. But at least life and liberty as given under 19 and 21 will be protected. As magistrate will be creating a check and balance. Now, there is another case, the situation arises in this condition when police arrest someone, but uh, police goes and says, okay, I have not able to complete the investigation and I need more time to investigate and interrogate with the accused. Under that condition, right of legal advocate is always there with him. And second, there's a restriction again on that situation. There's a procedure under section 167 of CRPC that has to be followed, which clearly says that okay, with the maximum time of 14 days, a person can be in police custody. That is 7 and 7. They need to come up again. Maximum, but in totality, they can have 14 days. However, if there is an apprehension that a person might create troubles with the witnesses or try to tamper with the evidence, he can be sent to judicial custody. But now, as I told earlier, there is a check and balance for accused at every stage. So here, this 167 CRPC says two things. If the offense is punishable with death, life imprisonment, or a term which exceeds 10 years or up to 10 years, the person can maximum stay for judicial custody in for 90 days, and police is duty bound to complete the investigation within 90 days and file the correspondent report and the final report under 173. However, if the person is if police is not able to complete the investigation, then the person is entitled for a bail. Similarly, if an offense is less than 10 years, punishable for term which is less than 10 years, then that time is reduced to 60 days. Then police has to complete their investigation within 60 days. So these are the rights that are there at the pre-trial level. That means when a person is arrested and the investigation has started. Along with that, there are further there are few rights like right to health, which is also flowing down from Article 21 and is also present in the procedure. For example, Section 54 says that whenever a person has been arrested, he should be presented before a medical officer, medical doctor, who will examine him and verify that whether he is injured or not, so that in future, if some advocacies happen with that person, there can be a comparison to what state he was when at the time of he was arrested and what situation he has undergone or any torture he has undergone in police custody. Similarly, Section 55A, of which was recently amendment inserted in CRPC, it says it's the duty of the arresting police officer to safeguard the health of the accused person. So there has been additional obligation on the police officer to monitor that the health of the person is safe. Because again, the parental reason goes that he's a citizen, he is not accused till now. And even if these are accused, there are certain more rights. Like right to health is also given to the prisoners also. So, and since he is not being convicted, there is an additional responsibility to safeguard his health. So these two rights are there. Beside these two rights, special provisions of for females are also mentioned. Like Section 46 says that a female cannot be arrested by a male officer. A female police officer has to be presented unless there is a circumstance which is so urgent in nature and there is a high probability of that particular female accused of absconding. Then, in that circumstances, a male officer can arrest. However, he has to prove before court that special circumstance. If he is not able to prove, then there is then he has exceeded his responsibility duties which is assigned to him, and he is liable for a penal action against himself. Similarly, a female officer accused cannot be arrested post sunset. That is like in the duration sunset to sunrise. So if you have to arrest a female, a police has to arrest a female, then it is the duty of the police officer to arrest him during the daylight time only. So this is another right that a female accused has. The next part comes with the right of bail. Now, as I have already discussed, that offences are of two categories. One, there is a bailable offence where the right of bail is it's a right that you have. These offences are slightly lesser grievous in nature. They have a punishment up to maximum up to 7 years, and these are said to be offences which are not very grievous for society, which are not which doesn't shock the conscience of society as much as other offences such as rape, murder, these kind of offences does. So there are two categories. One is bailable, where your bail is a matter of your right. The second is non-bailable. So under bailable offence, when you have been arrested, a police officer, by virtue of Section 50, is duty bound, specifically Section 50 subclause 2, is duty bound to inform the accused that okay, you have been arrested under this offence. This is a bailable offence. So if you can arrange the surety, I can discharge you after receiving a bail bond through basis of a surety, and you can go. Otherwise, you have to go court, and again the same procedure has to do appear before court. So in this, court doesn't have a discretion, but duty bound to release you on bail bond. For example, offences such as in the check bouncing, check dishonorment cases, where whenever the accused goes file his bail bond, he is released on bail. He is not arrested. However, the second category of offences, that those are non-bailable offences. These are little serious offences. However, it's again a discretion has been said, not an absolute restriction. Absolutism will take away the right which is there under Article 21 and 19. However, due to the restriction applied in Section 19(2) as well as applicable from Article 921, in these circumstances, court has to exercise its discretion. That discretion should be reasonable, should be judicious, should be based on sound principles of law. Again, there is certain exception to the bailable offence also. If there is a female, there is a child, there is someone who is very sick, he has to be released. These factors court will be examined. The basic difference is that earlier in the bailable offence, whenever the accused approaches, he has a right to take bail. However, here he falls under the category of discretion. It's a settled principle of law that every discretion presented should be exercised in a very judicious manner, having based on sound principle of natural justice. So there's a provision there, the bail can be given to a particular person, depending. For example, if he has been arrested for a very long time, say it's a offence which is punishable for less than 7 years. So, as per the Act, under the provision of Section 167, he is now entitled for a bail if the police is unable to show that the particular person has to stay inside bar and why they are not able to complete their particular investigation. Third part comes that anticipatory bail or the interim bails. Now, this is a very unique concept. It's not present with all the states because CRPC being law and order is a subject matter of state list, so every state has their own amendment to it. But with majority of the state, this law is applicable, Section 438A. Whenever we'll open the BEAR Act, we'll find respective state amendments also. But in general, in Delhi, it is applicable. In many part of the almost all part of the India, it's there. There are only few states which does not have the provision of anticipatory bail. However, it's universally applicable. It says that if a person apprehend arrest and there is a legitimate reason that he and the apprehension is based for a commission of a cognizable offense where police can arrest without warrant, then in that case, a particular that accused can apply to session court or to the honorable high court and get anticipatory bail. What the hidden principle is that this bail will only be given after hearing the public prosecutor. It will not be an ex parte order where the person goes and gets the bail. An opportunity will be given for the state to give their reasoning, and thereafter he can be arrested. The other important section here is regarding bail and arrest. It can be dealt at the trial, at the time of post-trial also, but I'll choose to discuss it at this point only. Is the section 436A. It's a very unique section, and it is a deep attempt to overcome the situation that India is facing due to slow judicial process due to lack of court infrastructure. And there, say, there is a report of Ministry of Law and Justice which says that 90% of the prisoners in the jails in India are under trial prisoners. Their trial has not been completed yet. So, this section caters to their need. It says that a person is entitled to a bail if he has completed half the term of the punishment of the offense which he has been charged for. So if you have spent half the, say, you are punished for, you have been charged with an offense which is punishable for 7 years, and you have spent almost 4 years in jail now. So depending on circumstances, court has not granted you bail on earlier occasion. Now the court will have to give it because you have spent almost half of the time. The second part of the section is another very unique part, which also relates to Article 20, subclause 3, which I will be dealing after this. It says that if you have completed the term and during the under trial tenure only for the offense you are charged with, then your complete sentence will be called off. For example, a person, and it happens in India on many occasions, it has been seen that under trial prisoner has spent more time in the trial, in the judicial custody, waiting for the conclusion of his trial. So, if that is the case in that situation, then the offense will be completely set out. It draws its genesis from Article 23, which says that no one can be punished for an offense. No one can be punished for for a punishment more than the offense that is prescribed. So, if you have completed that tenure, say you have been charged with an offense which is punishable for 7 years, and you have already spent your 7 years, then you are duty bound to be released completely. So this is what we have in bail. Now the next thing comes when investigation has started. Now investigation and interrogation both are there, and whatever right you had at time of lodging of FIR or others, you still have those rights. Now there is an addition of certain rights which are there, which basically these also existed earlier also, but then at this stage they will see the light of the day. So the first article that is there that draws us from Article 20. Article 20 gives you three basic rights. Firstly, right against ex post facto laws. Second, double jeopardy. Third, right against self-incrimination. So I'll start with the first one. Right against ex post facto laws. It says that no person can be convicted or punished for an offense which was not an offense at the time of commission of that act. So, for example, uh, in 2020, there is an act which government has not or the parliament has not said that it's an offense. However, in 2022, there comes an act which makes it an offense. And if police decide to arrest a person for an act done in 2020 when the offense when that particular act was not said to be an offense, he will never be then he cannot be charged in 2022 when that is codified in law. I'll give a simpler example. Currently, everyone after Nirbhaya judgment, everyone is aware that there is a huge public demand that the age of juvenile should be reduced from 18, depending after seeing what happened in Nirbhaya case. However, if a minor under the age of 18 commits an act which is through which there's an exception. No, I'll deal this part in the next part. I'll give another example. So basically, this deals with the stopping government to act retrospectively on a criminal law. So basically, I'll give you a better example here. Everyone is aware that government has modified Motor Vehicle Act. Now the penalty and the fees have and the penalty and the fines have increased. Now, if someone has committed an offence, say a violation of a traffic rule in 2017, for example, police has recorded it, traffic police has recorded it, but was not able to send a challan for that. Now in 2020, if they are sending a challan, they have to fine him as per the law prevalent in 2017 only. They cannot apply the new law. So this law protects someone from. I'll give you a case law to this extent also, so that doubts may be cleared. Now I'll give a case law like uh, there's a judgment called Om Prakash versus State of Uttar Pradesh. Now what happened? That bribery initially when IPC was codified in 1860, bribery was not an offense at that time. So what happened in this case, the particular case, there was a public officer who was charged for bribery, who has committed an act of bribery. But when that act was committed, bribery was not an offense. Like 165A was not in existence. The trial investigation went on, then the matter came for trial. Now the government wanted to try punish him as per Section 165A. However, the law, the courts clearly interpreted Section 20 surplus 1 and said that since the bribery per se was created as an offense much later than the when the actual offense was committed, you cannot charge a person for an act of bribery when the commission of at the time of commission of that act was not classified as an offense. So this act gives you a protection for that. Basically, it stops the retrospective applicability of criminal law. However, there is another part to it. It gives a benefit retrospective liability also in a way. Like for example, say for an offense X which was committed in 2000, the term of punishment was of say 10 years. However, in 2020, that punishment has been reduced to 5 years by amendments to Parliament. Now the trial was going on in this tenure, and finally the situation came for the judgment. Now he will be punished as per the new law. Here, the benefit of retrospective applicability will be given. So, what this law says that you cannot be punished for an offense when it was committed, for an act which was not an offense when it was committed. However, you can be given a benefit of reduction in liability, which subsequently happened after the commission of the act. Like similarly, however, if a punishment is increased, you will be charged with the earlier one. So here the benefit lies with the accused. So in the future, if a offense punishment for a particular offense is reduced, you will be given that benefit. However, if it's increased, you will be given the benefit of an earlier act. So retrospective liability is not applicable unless it is benefiting the accused. So this is ex post facto law. Second comes double jeopardy, right? No one can be convicted for an offense twice. Now, what one has to see, basically, it has drawn for the old traditional legal maxim. It says "nemo debet vex vexari," which means no person should undergo the same pain of trial for an offense twice. So basically, what happens here is what one need to see in this situation, that the offense which he has subsequently committed should be distinct. What government has to see, not the accused, I'm sorry, on that point. Uh, if a person has committed a subsequent offense, then this right will not be applicable. For example, to charge someone and to take away the right which is given under Article 22, what prosecution has to prove that the offense which was subsequently done is a distinct offense. The accused has not been tried for that particular offense, and it's a unique in its nature. For example, there have been series of cases on that matter. For example, someone in 2019 has been caught with smuggling or bringing certain amount of goods which were prohibited by the government. He has been charged, he has been punished in 2019. Now again he repeated the same act in 2020. Same fact, same amount, everything is same. However, the offense is of second time. So now in this situation, he cannot claim the benefit under Article 20 subclause 2, saying that okay, I have been punished for an offense. Now I cannot be punished for the same offense twice. Why? Supreme Court in series of judgment has very categorically classified that the trial courts has to see that the nature of an offense should be distinct in nature. It should be a new offense with new set of facts in a different timeline. What is protected is that a person cannot be charged the same offense twice. For example, you have committed a theft in 2019. You have been tried, and again there's the same offense, the same punishment has been there. Or uh, you have been charged with a theft in Delhi. Your trial is going on again. A Delhi court has convicted. Similarly, another trial in Bombay is going on for the same offense because a complaint was also lodged there. So under that circumstances, the trial will subsequently going on, a punishment which is given by the subsequent court will not be valid because the offense was the earlier one, the facts was earlier, and you cannot be punished for an offense two times. I'll give you another example here. There was a judgment Makmul versus State of Bombay, where custom authorities confiscated certain amount of gold. Person was convicted under that. Later on, he was charged under FERA policies, also FERA guidelines. Also, he went to the court. He took the plea under double jeopardy. Court categorically said that see, this is the different offense, and the earlier for which you have been charged was a different offense. Nature of both offense might be same, facts might be similar, but the offense is a distinction. So maybe a particular offense is an offense under IPC also and an offense under FERA also. So if both offenses are existing simultaneously for a particular act, you can be charged or punished for both the offenses. That is what the finding the court did. There is a similarity that exists with Section 300 also. I'll come with that for this thing when I'm dealing post trial situations, which is slightly different. There's a very thin line between 20 and 300, which I'll be explaining. The third and the most important thing comes is the right of self-information. That means you cannot be forced to be a witness against your own self. You can be a witness defending yourself, but you cannot be a witness against yourself. I mean to say that you cannot become a prosecution witness giving confession unless it's a confession given before court. Police authority cannot force you to accept anything. This is a parental law that has been present in the constitution. Similarly, based on this parental law, CRPC as well as Evidence Act has provisions where deposition given to or a statement given to police is not valid. Which I'll be telling you. But to understand this, we need to understand what is expressly said in this section, the requirement. It says that to be an accused for a formal charge, what is there should be a formal charge levied against you. We need to understand that if one has been arrested on the ground of suspicion, he is not an accused, that is a certain principle. However, he has to be arrested on a formal accusation which is there, maybe through an FIR or maybe through a court complaint. And once there is a formal charge against him, police has started investigating against that person, then police cannot force him to give any deposition or statement against himself. Now, another question at times comes that many times we have seen in movies, many of us are practitioners there. They have undergone this thing, that police ask for fingerprints, police ask for production of certain documents. So there's a glitch. Then this may amount to giving evidence against our own self. There was a glitch, there was a series of case law that evolved, the jurisprudence completely evolved, and finally Supreme Court says that the protection under 20 subclause 3 that is given to an accused is not against giving evidences which are factual in nature. However, what is being given is based on personal information. Police cannot force an accused to admit, state, or give something which is based on his personal knowledge. However, what self-incrimination can be coined as is self-incrimination can only mean conveying information based on personal knowledge. It cannot be a demand of evidence. For example, police says that you give fingerprint or give handwriting specimen, which might turn into an evidence against yourself. However, those will not be based on your personal knowledge and personal intellect. Hence, those will not be considered. Police basically cannot force the accused to admit anything or offense while giving deposition or any statement during police interrogation. In fact, Supreme Court went a step ahead also in this case. It says that there was a famous case of former Chief Minister of Odisha, Nandini Satapathy. I don't know how many of you will be remembering that case. But it was a case, it was a classic case. It went to Supreme Court where the law on this 20 subclause 3 was there. It said that police never asked a question on or asked the former minister to admit something on that particular offense which was being investigated. However, they have questioned something. If that minister would have given the answer, it would have opened another set of investigation because that statement would have disclosed certain fact which might have created or might have opened another set of investigation or for commission of a different offense. So Supreme Court said very clearly that the accused is entitled to keep his mouth shut if the answer has a reasonable prospect of exposing him to guilt in some other offense. So basically, what does Supreme Court try to say? That I have a right to silence if my statement may be not directly related to the question which has been asked, but may expose for an offense or a separate offense. I have a right to remain silent. And if police is forcing me to answer that question, which might lead to another offense, it will amount to self-incrimination. So the basic reason of this article was that since police is under authority, they can exploit, coerce, or force, torture, any kind of thing, and to extract some type of information. They are in the position to induce or something like that also. To protect and to establish our principle of natural justice and have a fair trial, these provisions were included in the Constitution as well as CRPC. And I'll start with CRPC. CRPC section 162 comes in at this stage. It says that no statement given to police, just not by accused, but by any other person is not valid and does not have that evidentiary value in itself. Similarly, police under 163, police cannot induce. The police officer, though being in a superior position, cannot make a false inducement to extract something or to any deposition. To match this, evidence also under section 25 and 26 specifically says that no confession given to police is valid, because it used to happen that police somehow tortured the accused and took the confession and closed the case. So to protect that thing, this was included in the both the procedure as well as the evidence part. Similarly, section 24 says that it's a duty of judge to see whether that particular deposition which a witness is giving is under an influence or is based on some kind of influence or not. If it's based on certain kind of inducement or influence, then judge has a right to set off that or remove that deposition, because it will not be a genuine deposition and it will violate the principle of fair trial. So therefore, to protect that thing, these two sections, both in CRPC as well as the Evidence Act, was included. Now, based on this thing, another modern concept which was evolution of science that was in criminal jurisprudence was narco analysis, brain mapping, and all these kind of tests included. Now, prosecution always said that it's similar to giving fingerprinting. It's similar for asking for production of certain documents. However, what was happening that person was not comfortable giving because he was not conscious, and there was a time when he admitted his own guilt. So this will somehow amount to self-incrimination because the statement given will be proved against him. Thereby, Supreme Court finally, in the judgment of Selvi versus State of Karnataka, brought a detailed guideline where it says that consent of accused is mandatory. If he denies there is no narco, there is no brain mapping test that can be done. There should be a legal advisor, there should be a psychological advisor who can guide the accused throughout the process, telling him the nuances, what will happen, what will not, and somehow psychologically prepare him for those things. If he wishes to, if he gives the consent, then the second tier of barrier comes to provide a legal consultant who will be there throughout the process as well as a psychologist. Third comes that the statement given during the narco test will have the same evidentiary value as the statement given to police. That means it does not have an evidentiary value. It says it can maximum be used to cross the accused during a cross-examination. That's it cannot be proved against the accused person. Lastly, the last balance which was done was uh, that this narco test has to be done by an independent agency, which may be in a hospital, but not a police authority. So somehow this process could be established of fair trial. Police cannot exploit the process of narco or brain mapping something to extract something and thereafter proving it against the accused person. Hence, 20, the Article 20 in totality protects against self-incrimination of the accused person. Now, this was my submission for the pre-trial stage. Now, after the investigation is completed, police files a charge sheet. And once that charge sheet is filed and it is accepted by the court, it becomes a stage of trial. This was clearly laid by Honorable Supreme Court in a recent judgment. 2 days back, there was a judgment in this A versus State of UP, where Justice Lalit clearly said that stage of trials only begins when a magistrate takes the cognizance of a charge sheet and comply with the provisions of 207, 208. Then the state changes from a pre-trial situation to a trial situation. Now, this is the transit state. Accused, right of accused, which was there, that right to be informed, right to fair trial, will now be converted in a different set of provisions and will come at the fourth stage, that is the trial stage. Now, the first right that comes, that right to know, which was there in the parental article 28, same thing applies here also. Now, what it says under section 207 and 208, depending upon the applicability of this section, the magistrate has to ensure that the complete set of charge sheet along all the evidences which have been filed before the court upon which the prosecution will rely should be supplied to accused page to page on the page to page basis. And every page which has been filed should be given to accused. And thereafter, uh, provision under C09 starts. That is right to defend. Accused is empowered to rebut that. How we will start? Now, when we go to the trial stage, at every stage, basically, trial can be classified under three stages. Firstly, framing of charges. When the charges are framed, there's a hearing, there's an opportunity given to the accused to rebut whatsoever charges police have framed based on the document evidence filed by the police. At framing of charges, if an accused cannot bring its own evidence or anything beyond the charge sheet or the final report, he has to remain in the domain of those charge sheet only and rebut his case. If he is substantially able to show to the court that there is no case made out, police has no, there is no prima facie case made out, there is no evidence against him, uh, then he can be acquitted and discharged at this point only. However, if there is a slight possibility that there is something which might convert into prosecution, then framing of charges can be done. Now, the first charge is start with providing documents at the cost of state to the accused under the provision of section 207 and section 208. It's a duty of the magistrate to give. Then, after receiving that thing, under section 227, accused is given a right to rebut those evidence which are filed. He has to prove to court through those documents which are filed that there is no offense of the nature of the charge which police has framed is made out. If he is successfully able to do it, he is discharged. If not, then uh, second stage of trial comes, that is evidence stage. Under this thing, court summons the evidences or deposition witnesses to give their deposition. Now, the reason before is that due to the earlier section 163 and 162, whatsoever statement police has filed of a particular witness under section 161 is not valid. It does not have that evidentiary value. Maximum it can be used for cross-examination. Examination, that's it, not more than that. So every witness, of every prosecution witness on which the police has relied or the prosecution has relied is called, and examination in chief has been conducted. Now, the right comes here. Section 273 specifically says that the accused, that all the evidence against the accused has to be taken in presence of the accused unless court feels it appropriate. So, accused will be knowing whatever the particular witness is saying, whatever evidences are coming against him, or whatnot. There's another specific provision also, section 3118, when accused is not able to understand the language nature of the charges. Court will take specific efforts to make him understand. If he is not of the particular, he is understanding the particular language, court will go into that effort to make him understand. Then comes to of right to defend, as I already discussed, and right to legal aid. Even at stage of framing of charge, when accused is brought before the court and he says that I don't have means to arrange an counsel who can defend me or who can argue my matter, then as per section 304 of CRPC and as well as Article 39 of the Constitution, every state, every court has a uh, legal aid cell, which is under an obligation to provide legal aid at expense of a state to every accused who is not able or who is desirous for state to provide him a counsel to defend him. So at this stage, these are the rights that is being given. Thereafter, next thing comes that after the prosecution evidence is done, again the prayer. It is another principle said that that is established before court that court should leave hundreds of accused, but should not charge a single innocent person. So a mechanism of CRPC has been evolved in such a way that after every step, accused has a right to defend himself. Now, once the prosecution evidence are completed, then there's another set of arguments that happens based on prosecution story. And if accused is able to prove based on the prosecution story that prosecution is unable to establish a case, then he can be discharged at that time. However, if there is a reasonable doubt in the prosecution of story and a substantial doubt in substantial claim of suicide case in favor of accused, then accused is allowed to lead its own witnesses. Even if there is a doubt on defense story, then too he is allowed to present his witness so that there might be certain change of environment circumstances and he may prove his innocence. Then defense witness has been called. After that, the third stage, that the second stage of trial is completed, that is called evidence stage. Both the prosecution and defense completed their argument, their depositions, their evidences. Thereafter, the final stage of argument, that is the third stage. After the final arguments are completed, the judgment is pronounced. And once the judgment has pronounced, we enter into the third stage, that is post-trial. Because the trial has been completed. After that judgment by a trial court has been pronounced. Now the stage comes of appellate. I have put this in the post-trial stage. So the first stage after the post-trial stage comes the stage of appeal. That is the appellate court. Now, if you have been acquitted by a trial court, you have a right to appeal to a superior court. Maybe it can be in a high court if it's to a session. If it can be a session court if it's to the magistrate first class MM or a CJM. CRPC categorically gives a right of appeal to every accused person who has been convicted at this stage. Now, another very important thing comes. There's a very important section here. That is section 389, which I want to discuss at that point. It says, now, a trial court said that a particular person is convicted for a particular offense. He has been sent to jail. Now, if that a person files an appeal, that appeal is admitted, he files another application in the 389. This says, okay, trial court has committed these errors as per my argument, and this appeal might take some time. So, suspend my sentence till the time this appeal is disposed. If I get acquitted from this appellate court, I'll be set free. If I am not given that I am convicted or the order of the trial court is upheld, then my sentence will again restart from the date, from the point where I left. So that is another very important aspect which is widely used during the litigation process. Thereafter, sentencing is already done. There's mitigating factor, there's everything that court has to consider while doing the post-trial error, while the judgment during the post trial. Now, the important aspect which I left while discussing double jeopardy was section 300 of CRPC. This is another very important section that one needs to see. It's slightly different from Article 20 subclause 2. Article 20 subclause 2 that no one can be punished for can be punished twice for the same offense. It went to a degree ahead. It says that no person who has been convicted or acquitted of a particular offense shall be recharged for the same till the time that conviction or the acquittal is imposed for the same offense or for the same set of facts. Please focus on this point that no one can be charged for a separate offense also on the facts which was a part of an earlier offense. For example, I'll give you a clear illustration so that one can be able to understand this thing very clearly. Giving someone a check, making him believe that you are willing to pay, and thereafter getting that check dishonored is an offense under negotiable instrument. Also, is an offense as well as it fulfills the ingredients of cheating under IPC also. So, as per section 300, if you have been charged with uh, offense under 138, and at time of filing that complaint under 138, you have not questioned or you have not complained about section 420, that is cheating, then after the conviction or the acquittal of the earlier complaint case based on the complaint, you cannot file a subsequent complaint or a case for cheating. So if you have to file for cheating also, it should be at the time of filing 138, because after that stage, if he is acquitted or if he is convicted, the same set of facts will be repeated and he will be convicted or acquitted. So to stop that thing, court has said, the legislation very clearly has said that same set of facts will not be questioned even if it is establishing another offense. Trial will not undergo. You still have a right to appeal on the basis of that thing, but a trial to that extent will not happen. If you want to be, you want a two offense arising from same set of facts, the trial of the same should go at the same time. However, there is an exception to it. The state government may permit it, but because of section, based on section 300 clause 1, it should not be done. Basically, these are the laws which was there to create or to protect the interest of the person who has already undergone the trial. Next, now, this has been the closure of the trial. This has been the person has been convicted. Now, if the post trial after a judgment has come and that judgment has attained the finality, if the accused is convicted, he will be called a convict. If he is acquitted, then he will not be no more an accused. So now the second thing comes for the right of a convicted person. What are the rights of a convicted person that are available? Earlier, what used to happen was that prisoners were not considered as a part of society as they have once committed a social breach. However, there were 2-3 landmark judgments that came from Supreme Court. One of such was Jasveer Singh versus State of Punjab, and similarly, there were many other judgments on the same matter. After which the social perspective changed, even the legislators' intent changed. They started to see them as a reformative subject rather than someone who has to be punished. So many things evolved. And as I discussed earlier, also, right to life with human dignity is always existing to Article 21 for everyone, be it a citizen, be a non-citizen, be it a accused, convicted, or acquitted person. It is there. So when a person is in the jail, there are certain basic human rights that are there. One is right to liberty that comes from from Article 13. It is mandatory, it has to be there. Second comes right to life. Now, right to life is a very larger ambit which requires many a big lecture series. But to make it very short in this, and will simply say that basic human rights such as right to air, right to food, right to healthy sanitation, healthy health, clean environment, drinkable water, medical assistance. These are all the basic rights that a convict person has. So there is, and then Article 39 is also there, which casts an obligation on states to timely provide legal assistance and as well as create healthy environment for the reformative setup of the prisoners. So that if we should not deal them as a separate part of the society, but the attempt of jail and the conviction should be that after that tenure which they have to undergo during the imprisonment time, they are a reformed person. They are not a social convicts which they were earlier. So these are the set of rights which are available to an accused at three different levels of trial, which is pre-trial, that is investigation level, which begins from commission of an offense, then it goes to the lodging of an FIR, then the investigation part. Thereafter, the trial begins after the charge sheet has been filed. Then the trial continues. Then judgment, then state of appeal, which may result into finality of the trial order or acquittal. Based on that, these are the fundamental as well as statutory rights which are available to an accused person. That's it from my side. So I will now ask Milan to ask the learners who are present here for any questions if they have.
Yes, sir. They have some questions.
Yeah.
Sir, Kunal is asking if police is beat the person in custody. So is there any legal charge, or we can also file any? There's also a legal remedy, like how can police beat in the legal custody? Like there is no warrant or.
See, that is the reason. Police is duty bound to produce the arrested person within 24 hours to magistrate. He has to, at the time of arrest, he has to make him get medical examination done and subsequently arrest him and then bring him to magistrate. And if magistrate permits, then only he can be in custody. However, if during the custody he has been beaten or he has been tortured to any sort, he can anytime approach the court for the bail on these grounds also, as well as file a writ petition for habeas corpus, as well as direction for mandamus for taking offense for the particular act which he has done for the particular police officer who has committed the act. So, same IPC provision can also be applied on the police officer also, if it is proved that he has tortured the accused and in the police custody. This is one. The second part is that there can be a compensation also. They can claim a compensation from the state also under the civil laws. There are many judgments which are there where due to those atrocities which have been done in the police, the state government has paid various compensations also, in addition to taking a criminal action against those police officers.
Sir, second question is from, can you please explain section 313 of CRPC in relation to the examination of the accused person?
313 gives the power to judge to question. Now, what happens is that India is an adversarial legal jurisprudence that we follow. So, when there are two ways to it, there is a cognizable offense, there is a nature of the trial that goes. So, I'll deal with the summary trial first for the lighter offense. So, at that, during the summary trial, there are many offenses which are tried summarily, which has a shorter punishment. So, 313 allows the court to question the accused. The basic purpose of this is to make the accused understand what are the charges against him. This generally happens before the accused files a defense. based on the answers the accused gives in the questions asked by judge in 313, it is decided whether he has a substantial case and whether the right to defense should be given to not. If he successfully answers something and he is able to understand the nature of offense for which he is charged and present to the court certain answers which are substantial in nature and can allow judge to believe his case, then it is easy for him to present the witnesses. Similarly, in the non-summary trial cases, it also happens. Those evidence sets a first set of interactions which accused has with the judge, and judge is duty bound at this stage to question all the material facts, so that accused is well aware of the facts and he can substantially tell the judge that okay, these are the allegations, and due to these allegations I am defending these. So it has that set of questions that impacts the judge also.
Thank you, sir, for this amazing webinar. I hope everyone gained some good insights through this webinar. Sir, now I would like to end up this session by saying a few lines. It is very well said that gaining knowledge is the first step to wisdom, and sharing it is the first step to humanity. I, Krishna Khandelwal, take this opportunity to thank Mr. Yashasvi Virendra, Advocate Supreme Court of India and Law Officer for Uttar Pradesh Government, for conducting such an amazing webinar. Due to the everyone efforts and participation, it has been an unforgettable experience, and I hope everyone takes away some good memories. It's been a pleasure being with all of you today. Thank you, sir, and all the participants.
Thank you.